Two teams have a chance to clinch on Tuesday. One gets it done, and the other, Welcome to Stanley Cup Date, a product of the NHL Wraparound podcast for the last day of April 2025. Vic and Neil with you. Tuesday evening, I think 3 out of the 4 games, unpredictable in terms of the way they unfolded during the course of the night. I think Minnesota and Vegas pretty much played close to form. But those other 3 games had no clue that they were going to unfold the way they did.
No one did. The people in the buildings, the fans that go to the games, the people that are watching it on TV, you've got no idea when you sit down to watch the game how this thing is going to unfold, which is why it's so great. If it was that predictable, it wouldn't be any fun to watch. But even the Minnesota-Vegas game, that was very close, that actually could have gone the other way very easily. As I'm watching that one, I don't know which way it's going to go.
That's the fun. If it was predictable, like the NBA is, and we'll get into that a little bit later. 55-point margins in clinching games is supposed to be compelling. But we digress. Let's jump in with the first clincher. First team to advance, Carolina Hurricanes, a 5-4 double overtime win over the New Jersey Devils, who really gave it all they had in this game. And for the Hurricanes, Pyotr Kochetkov in goal, Frederik Andersen out, Spencer Martin was called up to be the backup in this game. And you talk about a surprise opening. Dawson Mercer, Timo Meier off a Jacob Slavin turnover, and Stefan Noesen with a tip-in, 3 goals on 8 shots, and they opened this game the way I think we both thought Carolina would.
Yeah, I mean, it's 3-0 Jersey in Carolina at the end of the first. I'm so incensed by not being able to predict what's going on in these games. I go out to the grocery store. I'm so mad. Now, I'm not mad because I want Carolina to win and I don't want Jersey to win. I'm mad because I'm going like, how could this be happening? This isn't what's supposed to happen. I've already said on the podcast that Carolina's going to win.
What are you actually buying at the supermarket during your time of distress there?
Potato chips, because that's my go-to happy food.
Well, chips would probably be a good term because Rod Brindamore probably removed a little bit of paint off the wall after the first period ended because the Canes came out in the second. Taylor Hall, Jackson Blake, Andrei Svechnikov gets his 5th of the series in the first 5 minutes and 40 seconds within a 3:54 span, and this game is tied.
I know, it was amazing. What I thought you were going to say about me going out to get the chips was, I guess that's what you do when the chips are down.
Not bad. So the Canes tie this right back up. Nico Hischier then responds a minute and 46 seconds after Svechnikov's goal. But as the game goes on, you can see Carolina is really starting to take this game back territorially, shot-wise. And before the second period ends, actually midway through the second period, Sebastian Aho on the power play ties the game. And you're starting to really see Carolina bring it the way we thought that they were going to do so at the start of the game. And all the momentum on their side, the territorial advantage. And in the reality, the only reason that this is a game is because of the work of Jacob Markstrom in the Devils' net.
No, he'd been tremendous. And the fact that you got to give the Devils their due, that they came out fast, which is, I'm sure, something that Sheldon Keefe wanted, to jump them fast, and they did it. And they got out to the 3-0 lead after 1 period. And then it was all up to Markstrom to, shoulder the game from then on.
He had to make 15 saves in the third, 14 in the first overtime, and the shot attempts in this game were right in line with what we typically see from the Hurricanes, 111 and 52 overall. And the turning point came Early in the double overtime, Dawson Mercer takes a double minor for a high stick, which looked like it was somewhat of a pass follow through, but his stick did move after the release of the pass. He cuts Jesperi Kotkaniemi and Aho with the second of the game from Shane Gostisbehere at 4:17. It was interesting because on that double minor, the first half of the power play looked deliberate, kind of like what we saw from the Maple Leafs in game number 4, overtime in Ottawa. And then the second power play got more urgent, and that's when they got the winner.
Yeah, and of course it's Aho, who is just a tremendous player for Carolina, and it's sad for the Devils because they did push as hard as they could push in this one with a banged up crew, but the Carolina was the healthier and better team.
You think of how banged up the Devils were, particularly on defense, and Brian Dumoulin, who's not part of their top 6, winds up playing 37 minutes and 19 seconds last night. Really had a terrific game. And as you just pointed out, a real noble effort by the Devils in a losing cause.
And the other thing I like about Dumoulin is that I said that he would get traded at the deadline. And the reason I said he would get traded at the deadline was because he was on those 2 cup teams in Pittsburgh. And that if you're going to go into the playoffs and everybody needs extra defensemen, what better guy could you have than Dumoulin, who has experienced all that playoff action that he had? And that turns out that Sheldon Keefe really needed him because of what you just said. He ended up playing, a ton of minutes.
But the Hurricanes do advance. They will play the winner of the Washington and Montreal series. Let's go north of the border. The Maple Leafs are now 1-13 in potential series clinching games going back to 2018. They lose 4-0 to Ottawa in Game 5. They still do have a 3-2 series lead. But here's where history starts to play the mind games. And I know that we talked about this earlier, that none of the players, obviously, on this current Maple Leaf team were around in 1967. However, you start to wear that history. And it's not only past history, it's recent history that this group has shown an inability to close out games. Their offense sputters, their power play sputters. And this was right out of their blueprint in not being able to close this series at home on Tuesday.
And it will put the emphasis on Craig Berube, who answers questions, I think, really good with the people from the networks. When they ask him things, he shrugs everything off. It'll be up to him to make sure that this group doesn't allow the history to come into their head, and he finds a way to get it out of their head, if it's even in their head, but to get into today and live the moment.
The Leafs had a big shot edge early in this game, but Thomas Chabot's point shot through a screen in 3:46 of the second is the first goal and the only goal heading into the third period. And you got to remember that Jake Sanderson's overtime winner in Game 4 was also through a screen. Ridley Gregg winds up taking a terrible penalty in the third period, gives the Leafs an opportunity to tie this game, and instead, shorthanded goal, Adam Gaudette to Dylan Cousins. It's a 2-0 lead, and you could tell all the energy was out of the arena at that point.
Oh, for sure. But what a fantastic goal that was by Cousins, and what a pass from Gaudette. Just perfect. Cousins is the left shot coming down the right side. Perfect. Yep. So that's what you want, right?
Yep.
And Gaudette just dished him that perfect pass that landed flat, that he was able to put by the left side of Stolarz. And yes, the energy and the air went out of the building, and for good reason, because that puts a knife in the Toronto Maple Leafs at that point in that game.
Empty net goals by Tim Stützle and Brady Tkachuk make the final score 4-0. And something I want to ask you about the power play here, because as we just spoke about in the Carolina double overtime, and we talked about the Leafs having a chance to wrap up the series in Game 4, also on overtime, they look deliberate with the 4 forwards, almost like they're trying to cut everything too fine. Nothing ever comes from the points on the Leaf power play. Everything is worked from the half boards down low. And they use 5 forwards. And perhaps is it time to maybe show a little bit different look, put Morgan Riley, defenseman, on the point, and at least change the appearance of what they're going to do a little bit, because power plays dried up.
But did it dry up for the game 4 as well? Or did they?
Well, it typically does towards the end of these series, and the statistics show that. And you could see in overtime in Game 4 that everything was going too slow. There's no urgency, and everything is coming really from 30 to 45 feet in towards the net. There is nothing back on the points that really shows any sort of threat.
And you need to get point shots. You have to get shots from the point on a power play. You have to. So your point is well taken. If you're asking me, do you think they will do that? I'd say no. They're going to stick with what they've got. Are you asking me, should they do that? I don't know. But your point is really well taken. You must get shots from the point, or have the threat of a heavy duty point shot. That, you know, I listened to Subban and Mess talking about it on ESPN, and they were saying that, you know, if you're going to have the courage to block my shot, you got to take a chance that I'll break your ankle. I could, you know, break your shin bone. I could hurt you, but you have to have that threat at the point. Because if you don't have that threat, that there's nobody that's going to hurt me with their shot, you're going to charge at them all night. So let's see what they do. But I think it's an excellent point. Not the point shot, the point. You see, we got too many points here. And then there's Braden Point.
Well, but that's my point. And I make one good point a month, and it is April 30th. So I'm getting in just under the deadline.
So we'll give you a point for that.
Thank you. Game 6 of that series, Thursday in Ottawa, and the Senators will have a chance to tie the series. And if the heat is not turned up already, it's going to turn up even more if they bring that series back to Toronto for a 7th game.
Oh my goodness. I can't even imagine what it would be like at the arena in Toronto if that comes back for Game 7.
We head west. Vegas Golden Knights take a 3-2 series lead over the Minnesota Wild with an overtime victory on a goal by Brett Howden. What I want to start with here, though, is Jack Eichel, who I think after the first 4 games of this series was, as we had put it, somewhat pedestrian, not terribly visible on the ice, only had 1 assist. He had 2 assists, including one on William Karlsson's goal to open the scoring, and that was a shorthanded goal where he probably could have cleared the puck and instead held on to it through center ice and decided to make a play. Great pass, great play. Vegas on the board at the 8:25 mark of the first.
But what impressed me about that was the courage that he had. First of all, he could have just dumped it, but he held on to it and said, like, okay, I can imagine he's thinking, let's see what we can do with this. And the player was right on him. Yep. And he just took his arm and threw the guy's stick away from him so that he could get to a place where he could pass the puck to Karlsson. A lot of guys don't have the courage to do that stuff. I thought that was spectacular. And his assist on the Mark Stone one-timer was great as well.
Sandwiched in between those 2 goals was Kirill Kaprizov actually tying the game on the same power play that Karlsson had scored the shorthanded goal. Came only 13 seconds later on a great feed by Matt Zuccarello, who's just continues to be a magician with the puck.
There was a wide open seam there from Zuccarello to Kaprizov. And, you know, one of the things to notice is that it's not just the passer that needs to find the shooter. The shooter, who's Kaprizov in this case, has to find the passer. So what I'm saying by this is that the shooter's got to get to a place where the puck can be delivered, and the one that's passing it has to get into a place where he can make that pass possible. So that it takes both. It's not all on the passer. It's on both of them. And it was very evident on that goal that Kaprizov set himself where Zuccarello could get him the puck so that he could one time.
After a scoreless second period, the storyline started to unfold further when Marc-Andre Fleury had to relieve Philip Gustafsson at the start of the third period, who reportedly had an illness.
Which is something I don't remember ever seeing this. I know dehydration can come into it with goaltenders because they're out there the whole game, and that's why they started putting water bottles on the top of the net for the goalie. But I've never heard of a guy suddenly getting the flu or getting the, whatever in the middle of the game. So it's very mysterious to me, and I felt bad for Fleury that he was the one that had to let in the overtime goal.
In order to get to overtime, the Wild tied the game early in the third period. Joel Eriksson with a great backhand pass to Matt Boldy, who makes a terrific power move on Alex Pietrangelo to beat Adin Hill to tie the score. Boldy was challenged by John Hines that playoff hockey is a lot different than the regular season. And this guy's answered the call, and I think one of the things that we see are how players emerge into the players that they are going to become for years down the road. Boldy is going to be a hell of a power forward if he's not already.
Yeah, well, he already is a great forward, but he's going to be amazingly a power forward as he matures in the game and in the NHL.
But as the third period goes on, it appears to me that Vegas has a little bit more of a push. They've got a shot edge. They're putting a little bit more pressure on than the Wild are at this point. Fleury's holding firm. Ryan Hartman gets the apparent go-ahead goal with 1:15 left. And originally, this play was reviewed by the NHL for a possible kick, which was not there. So then Bruce Cassidy challenges for offside. And indeed, Gustav Nyquist was just a shade offside. So I want to ask you here that you want to get the call right. But in the spirit of the rule, guys offside by a toenail or a heel, literally. Do you like where getting it right is the main thing, or are you more in favor of human error? And the way the speed of the game is, it's hardly human error. Everything happens so quickly. Would you just want to see that play let go?
Yes. The answer is clearly yes, but the horse is out of the barn. They're probably never going back to that. And on offside, it drives me crazy. Vic, the part that bothers me the most about video review and offside review and all this stuff is that hockey was supposed to be continuous action. Okay. And, if you weren't in as good a shape as the other team, they could wear you down, because that's why you had to be so highly conditioned, because you had to go. And with these reviews, it's sort of a joke that a coach only gets 1 30-second timeout when, we might sit on the bench for 3 minutes waiting for the referees to decide whether the toenail was over the blue line or not. So I don't like it, but I think it's here to stay.
We go to overtime, and we've often talked about just simple things in hockey that can deliver big results. Puck goes in deep. Tanner Pearson wins a 50-50 behind the net. Puck comes around to the far boards. Nick Hague, good job pinching in. He tries to send it back behind the net. And Zach Bogosian is there, but the puck jumps over his stick. And with him behind the net, that's the open lane for Pearson to get the puck back to Brett Howden. He buries it. 3-2 lead for Vegas.
Yeah, and that's hockey, though, right? That's hockey.
Yeah.
And it's not Bogosian's fault.
Nope.
This stuff happens all night long in all the different games. And we've already talked about the Toronto game. If you watch that over again, when Matthews hit the post, if Auston Matthews scores at that point, it's a whole different game. And maybe Ottawa's eliminated by the end of it. But he didn't score. Ottawa kept their momentum because they didn't score. It's like you said, that shorthanded goal took all the air out of the building, and it did. Mm-hmm. But if Matthews scored his goal, would that have put enormous air into the building to the point where Ottawa never would have had the gumption to get the shorthanded goal? So what I'm saying is stuff happens all night long in all the different games, and that's what makes it so great.
That's how thin the margin is.
Yes, exactly.
In the last game of the night, the Edmonton Oilers have completely gotten off the mat against the Los Angeles Kings with a 3-1 win in Game 5 at Crypto.com Arena. They can close out this series in Game 6 on Thursday. We have seen in the first 4 games of this series, the Kings come out, outskate, out-hit, out-chance, out-everything on the Oilers. And Edmonton completely flips the script in Game 5, 19-4 edge in shots. The only reason that this game is scoreless after the first period is because of Darcy Kuemper, whose best save was on Evan Bouchard from in close. And you can't tell me that you saw this coming.
No way. And let me ask you this. Could it be that the Los Angeles Kings are suffering from Maple Leafism? And what I mean by that is they're like, everything's tightening up because they've seen this movie before. They haven't been able to get by the Oilers. Now they're supposed to get by them. Now they look like they're going to easily get by them. Now they lose in Edmonton and they're coming back to LA and they're like, oh my God, is this going to happen to us again? Do you think that's possibly going on in LA?
I think it's the same thing as the Maple Leafs had going on against the Bruins, that it reaches a point was, can we ever beat these guys?
Yeah. That's why I called it Maple Leafism.
Good term. We'll see. We'll see if it makes it in the Webster's Dictionary next time around. The Kings do score first. 3:33 into the second. Andrei Kuzmenko on the power play, which has been terrific for the Kings in this series. But less than 3 minutes later, Evander Kane begins to put a stamp on this series. He was excellent. He ties the game at the 6:16 mark on really a great read by John Klingberg to keep a puck in. Kane on the night, 5 shots, 7 attempts, 4 hits. And this is the kind of supplemental support that the Oilers have been looking for and that they're going to need. And if Kane could be this effective going forward, whether or not the Oilers win this series still remains to be seen. But this was a real shot in the arm last night.
The Edmonton Oilers and the Washington Capitals to some extent, but the Edmonton Oilers own the scrap heap, I think, by now. Because think about the players that are very good for them. Corey Perry, Klingberg, Kane, guys that other teams threw away. They didn't want them. They're reclamation projects. Yeah. And it's astounding that Kane misses the entire season and comes back in the playoffs and is this good. Klingberg, how long did he miss? He was just sitting out there as a free agent. They signed him. And then, of course, the Corey Perry saga of a couple of years ago where Chicago lets him go right during the season, and Edmonton signs him, and he is very, very effective for them. So it's just something to take note of.
This game goes into the third period, tied at a goal apiece, and it's very hard to get on Darcy Kuemper. Had 43 saves in this game. And this would have been a blowout if not for him. But at 7:12, Victor Arvidsson takes a shot that Kuemper blockers right into the oncoming path of Matthias Janmark. He scores the go-ahead goal. And for all intents and purposes, this is it. I mean, I think we have seen how difficult it has been for the Kings to close games. And now the Oilers are in this spot. And perhaps this is their playoff experience in getting to the final last year and getting to Game 7, where everything took over for them in a defensive posture. They had to kill off a Darnell Nurse penalty midway through the third, but they blocked shots. There was no panic. Calvin Pickard didn't have to be great in this game, but he makes a couple of saves, including one on a wraparound. Late in the third period, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins gets the empty netter. Now the Oilers get home with a chance to bury this.
And what happened to the LA Kings and their home ice dominance and only 4 losses at home during the entire regular season? Let me tell you something, Vic. To get outshot 46-22 in your barn is horrible. Yeah. It's horrible. Yeah. The fans, it's horrible for the players. It's horrible for everybody. And it really is an indication of the dominance of one team over the other, especially on home ice, because at home ice, you want your guys to come out and say, we're going to make it so that teams don't want to play here. And I mean, this game, it looked like Edmonton was playing at home.
It did. And we've talked about how great the Kings have been, but when you get in a playoff series and you let games go the way the Kings have, and we've said this series could have and probably should have been done in 4, and that it wasn't, perhaps they are just now mentally drained.
Well, I said, like, here's 2 teams in LA Kings and Toronto Maple Leafs. Are they both suffering from the same mental block right now?
I think you could make a very good case for that. Thursday at 10 o'clock, and we didn't say Minnesota and Vegas. They will play their 6th game, 7:30 on Thursday. So that will precede Oilers and Kings. Wednesday games. Montreal at Washington. 5th game down in D.C. The Caps have a chance to wrap up this series. Thoughts going in?
I think the Caps are going to be able to wrap it up at home. They're very, very good at home. Usually, of course, what do we just say about the Kings? But I would be surprised if Montreal was able to get this to go back to La Belle Province, because I think that Washington will jump all over them in this one.
I think the Caps are going to feed off that 4-goal third period with really the entire atmosphere in the Bell Center against them. They were able to answer the call. They have gotten back to, or at least for 20 minutes, got back to the team that we saw during the regular season. And we mentioned a number of times that the Canadians did come back against the Capitals in 2010 from a 3-1 deficit in a 1-8 matchup. This one feels a little bit different, though.
It really does. And, give Montreal all the credit in the world. They're an upstart team that made that 8th spot very, very, very late in the season. Nobody outside of Montreal gave them a chance to make the playoffs, and they're in there. Even if they lose in Washington in Game 5, they've put on a really good showing for themselves, and they've got a good future with this young core they have.
7 o'clock on ESPN. At 7:30 on ESPN2, Florida and Tampa, with the Panthers having the chance to close that series out with a 3-1 lead. Brandon Hagel will not play in this game, and as a result of the hit that he received from Aaron Ekblad, the latter has been suspended for 2 games for his forearm to the head of Hagel. Thoughts on the suspension?
I think it's the right thing to do. I don't know that Ekblad was purposely doing what we saw on the replays when his forearm clearly hit Hagel right in the jaw, which clearly, when you get hit in the jaw like that, is going to give you a concussion. But the league had to suspend him for that. They just had to. And so it's going to be interesting. And the thing is about these suspensions is Ekblad is, yes, he's out for 2 games now. Hagel could be out for the rest of the series, and if Tampa goes on, he could be out for the next series. You never know.
If they get that far.
No, I'm just saying if they were to get that far, Hagel
Yeah.
could be out of the playoffs for this season. We don't know how bad it is.
And that there is an injury, and that it is known that Hagel's not going to play in this game, probably factored into a 2-game suspension as opposed to a 1-game suspension, because Barkov was able to come back after Hagel hit him. And there was also talk about whether or not Matthew Tkachuk should have been suspended for his hit at the end of Game 3 on Jay Gensel, and Gensel was not injured. So do you think the extra game is a result of this injury?
I do think it is a result of the injury. Now, one of the things that one of my friends said to me, well, do you notice that Tampa announces early before the hearing that Hagel has been ruled out for Wednesday to make sure that the league and everybody knows that he's hurt? I never think about things in that devious way. And my friend also, who is a Panthers fan, said he probably mysteriously somehow will be okay to play in the game after they've announced that he can't play. But I think that I would doubt very much that will happen. There's always a theory by the other team, right? Like the Gensel hit wasn't that bad. The fans of the teams always think their team's getting shafted.
Oh, they always do. And one of the points that kept coming up was, well, how could the officials have missed this on the ice? And I had lunch with Dave Jackson on Tuesday, who, by the way, new grandfather. Between the time that we had lunch and the pucks were dropped last night. So
what did you do to him at lunchtime?
Well, I didn't do anything to him. I just ate my wings, and that was it. But we talked about this play, and that how do the referees miss it? Well, when we're seeing it on TV, we are seeing the camera pointing down from an elevated position. And if you check out our X account, we have the views that show how this could have been missed by referee John McIsaac. Because from ice level, both Brad Marchand and Luke Glendening pass right in front of McIsaac during the course of the entire sequence of that play. So McIsaac can turn to look in that direction, but both players pass through his line of vision at exactly the time that it took for that entire episode to unfold.
But did Dave Jackson talk about why would both the other referee and the two linesmen, all of them missed it?
They did. And maybe Chris Rooney, the other referee, was far enough away, and perhaps both linesmen were distracted, because I don't think we could see where they were positioned in relation to the episode. So it's one of those things that happen. I think at the end of the day, even though there was no penalty call, the league got this right in terms of the suspension.
But too late for the Tampa Bay Lightning, who got scored on a very important goal by Ekblad
to tie the game, and then Seth Jones 11 seconds later, and here we are.
Yep.
The final game of the evening will be played at 9:30 on ESPN. St. Louis and Winnipeg, and the Jets are going to try to find their game. They do get some good news in that Gabe Vilardi will play his first game since March 23rd. Nikolai Ehlers has also resumed skating. His last game was April the 12th, when he had that run-in with the linesman that caused that injury in Chicago. Is Connor Hellebuyck going to show up here?
I sure hope so. I mean, I've been thinking about him in the last couple of days, and thinking about if they lose to St. Louis, how difficult will it be to go walk up onto the stage when they announce that he's won the Vezina Trophy and say his speech about how grateful he is to have won the Vezina Trophy, and thank his teammates and his coaches and all that. If he doesn't play well in the playoffs, I've been thinking about how hard that would be to say, yeah, I know I'm winning the Vezina Trophy, but I let you all down in the playoffs.
Well, do you think that all of these trophies that are up for votes, and obviously there are some that are fixed based on statistics, such as the Art Ross for points and the Richard Trophy for goals. Do you think that playoff performance should play into this and that they are voted on after the players are done?
No, I think they should be regular season trophies. And I'll tell you why. Because I've already voiced an opinion that the playoffs were meant in the very beginning when Lester Patrick and Frank Patrick came up with the playoffs for the NHL. They were meant to give teams a second chance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that maybe had a bunch of injuries during the regular season, but they might have been just as good as a team that won the Prince of Wales Trophy, which was for first place.
Right.
So if you take that forward and you go to now, and the playoffs are really, I call them the sprints. The marathon is the regular season, and then the sprints is the playoffs. I think the trophy should be based on the marathon, because what would happen, Vic, is you would see somebody have this great playoff performance, and that would make you forget how great the guy was during the regular season. So, for example, Kucherov is not having a great playoff, in my opinion. And I think everybody would agree because he hasn't scored a goal in how many games. But he had a fantastic season. Yeah. So I don't think that his playoffs should diminish his chances to get the MVP of the league. If, because I'm sure he'll be in the final three. And I would hate to see somebody say, well, I'm going to vote for McKinnon because he had a better playoff than Kucherov.
I'm glad I asked.
Well, do you like the answer?
I love the answer. It's a great answer.
Well, hopefully somebody else out there likes the answer, and they'll write us an email and say, I like that answer.
Or maybe they'll say, you know what? I don't like your answer. So
either way, just write something.
A full night of hockey on ESPN. And I want to go back to something that we talked about yesterday, Neil, because you had asked me about how games are determined for the networks.
Well, Vic, you found out exactly how they do this calculation of who gets what game in the playoffs, because it's confusing to me. One night you've got all ESPN, the next night you've got all TNT. Like, how do they come up with who gets what game?
The one thing that I did say was that they try to balance everything. And I spoke with a good buddy of mine, Eric Lowe, who handles the programming for the NHL on ESPN. And it's done as follows. There are 56 possible games in the first round. 16 of them are guaranteed and 12 if necessary for both ESPN and TNT/TBS. The if necessaries are dictated by NBA scheduling. Now, I will say this in advance because we already have one series done. But going into the first round, the breakdown for game 5s, where ESPN would get 6 out of the 8, TNT would get 6 out of the 8 possible game 6s, and both would get 4 of the possible game 7s. Of course, as we said, that's not possible now. This is the last year of this current setup because the NBA is leaving TNT and going to, I believe, Amazon and NBC. But hopefully people now a little bit more familiar with how this all falls out.
That's very interesting and something that I've often wondered that. And you look, and I'm sure for the non-TV person, which is me and everybody listening, it's great to hear from you about how that happens, and your connections in the TV world are just, it's fascinating because you can get this kind of information and give it out to people. I find it extremely interesting. It's part of the playoffs. It's the coverage of who you have to listen to that night. Do you listen to Brendan Burke on TNT, or are you listening to your good friend John Butchergross on ESPN?
Going back to the last contract, which was from 1992 through 2004, many of these planning sessions, and you'd have to actually sit in on one of these to understand how involved it is and how many machinations there are to play with. And there's building conflicts, and there's teams that won't play on certain days. And you remember right at the start of the first round that ESPN lost a 12:30 window because neither the Hurricanes or the Lightning wanted to play the early game on Easter Sunday.
And I don't blame them. I think that and I get it. I get how there's only so much TV time. And let me ask you this. Was this the first year of these marathon playoff games? Like we get the quadruple back to back type games. Have we had that in the past where we've had the thing go all day long?
Yeah.
Okay. I guess I just don't remember it. And this year's, I've got a good imprint on the couch now from those 2 days of 4 games in a row.
What do you mean by that?
I mean my big ass imprint on the couch.
We're going to move away from TV now, get into just a couple of quick news items. Rick Tocchet will not return as the Canucks head coach. He was the 2024 Jack Adams Award winner, just completed the final season of a 3-year contract. So now his hat's in the ring, and I think he's going to end up someplace east. It's not like I'm really going out on a limb on this one.
I know exactly where he's going to end up.
Oh, where's he ending up?
Philadelphia. He's going to be the next Flyers coach. Huh? That's where he's from. I mean, that's where he lives in real time. And I got to say this to you. Like, what the F is going on in Vancouver? Like they lose one of their best players in JT Miller, get very little for it. They trade away Horvat a year or so ago, or a year and a half ago, and get very little for it. They take on Philip Hedl from the Rangers, who everybody knows has had concussion problems, and then went out with a concussion with them. Yes, they had a good year last year under Rick Tocchet. Yes, they did. They didn't have a good playoff, but they had a good regular season. They have a horrible year this year, and now Rick Tocchet walks away. And they say, well, we're just gonna let him be a free agent. We're not gonna pick up the option that we have to keep him, but we're gonna try to keep him with a brand new contract. Like, why wouldn't you just pick up the option that you negotiated when you brought him there? I don't get what's going on. They're losing their players. They're losing their coach. What is going on with Vancouver?
Remember when we had Steve Simmons on a few weeks ago on Wraparound? And look, what goes on in Toronto, obviously, is the headliner. But he said there's stuff that goes on in Vancouver that, being on the East Coast, we may not have that same exposure, or we may not live it every day, and as opposed to clubs that are in the East. But he says, what goes on out there is off the charts also. And this is just another example of it.
I'm baffled by this, and I'm also baffled by why Rick Tocchet is in such supposed demand. Like, what has he done that's made him Scotty Bowman reincarnated, even though Scotty's still alive?
Yes.
Al Arbor reincarnated. Like, what has he done?
Won the Jack Adams Award last year.
Yeah, that usually gets you fired the next year.
And, well, he didn't get fired, but he's not coming back, so.
He's not coming back.
All right. Valtteri Filppula retires from the NHL after 22 seasons, 16 of them in the NHL, played 1,056 games for the Red Wings, Lightning, Flyers, and Islanders before ending his career in native Finland. He won the Stanley Cup with Detroit in 2008.
And he was a good player for all those teams. How important was he for the Tampa Bay Lightning in their journey to become a contending team? Of course, his best hockey was in Detroit, where he started, but he was always a good player, and 1,056 games in the NHL is nothing to be sneezed at.
His career is now history, and that's a perfect segue into this day in Stanley Cup history.
Oh, I love this part.
You're so enthused. I can't tell if it's feigned or if it's real. But nonetheless, we're going to hit you with this one, that on April 30th, there were 3 Game 7 overtimes, all in the first round. So we're going to start most recent and go backwards. Just 2 years ago, Carter Verhaeghe stunned the Bruins in Game 7 to knock Boston out after their record-setting year.
Record-setting year, President's Trophy, and stunned the hockey world. Really, that the upstart Panthers, who were obviously the 8th seed because they beat the President's Trophy team, which obviously when you win the President's Trophy, you get the 8th seed to play against, like Winnipeg is playing against St. Louis this year. That was a stunner when that happened.
It was shocking. I remember sitting there with my son Jake, and to wrap your head around the fact that this team that was so marvelous during the course of the regular season had let a 3-1 series lead get away and were no longer there. We sat there with our jaws just dropped. Couldn't believe it.
And for the Boston Bruins, it's been downhill ever since.
It has. The second goal came in 2014. Current Jet Nino Niederreiter, who was then playing with the Minnesota Wild, scored against the Colorado Avalanche, who, by the way, had lost the Game 7 to the Wild years before on a goal by Andrew Brunette, which we documented. That was Patrick Roy's last game. In 1994, the last of the 3, Pavel Bure scores to advance the Canucks past the Flames. And the Canucks had to win 3 consecutive overtime games to come back from that 3-1 series deficit.
Wow. That's I didn't remember that, but you're right. They sure did.
And the Canucks were saved by goaltender Kirk McLean earlier in overtime with a post-to-post save on Robert Reichel, which was absolutely spectacular, setting the stage for Bure's heroics. And again, McLean doesn't make that save. Probably saves you a little bit of angst going forward.
McLean was fantastic in the playoffs that year. And if you remember in the final, they won Game 1 all because of Kirk McLean's heroics in that game.
I remember. But our highlighted event for this date, we go back to 1986, the Smythe final between Calgary and Edmonton. Game is tied at 2 apiece. Early in the third period, when at the 5:14 mark, Steve Smith, on his 23rd birthday, attempts an outlet pass. It hits the left leg of Grant Fuhr, goes into the Edmonton net. Perry Berezin is credited with the goal, and that is the final goal of the series as the Flames advanced past the Oilers, who were going for 3 straight Stanley Cups.
Yes, and if they had won that 3rd straight, they would have won 5 straight, which is the all-time record set by the Montreal Canadiens.
The Flames were 1-6-1 against the Oilers during the course of the regular season that year. That's when they used to play 8 times within the division. And the Oilers had taken the first 6, then there was a tie. And the last time they met was the last weekend of the regular season. I mean, that was one of those white heat rivalries like Quebec and Montreal, Rangers Islanders at the time. And they were playing just not to get injured. And the Flames won that game 9-3. And I remember seeing Stan Fischler the next day saying, I don't know why, but I think this game's got a little bit of significance to it because it meant a lot to the Flames. Didn't mean anything to the Oilers, but it told the Flames that regardless of the circumstance, they could beat Edmonton. And they certainly did so in that series, taking that series to the Oilers, not being afraid, and really setting the stage for the events that happened with Smith.
When you think about that Oiler team, that goal went in at the 5:14 mark of the third period, and that the Oilers couldn't get a goal by the end of the game. That's really amazing when you think of the firepower that the Oilers had back then.
But I remember one thing, and we see this in the playoffs now, that the Oilers were a puck-carrying team. They could certainly play along the wall also, but that they tried to carry the puck in, and Calgary was standing up at the blue line, and the Oilers weren't making that dump and chase, that straight line, that win 50-50 battles along the boards. That wasn't happening the rest of that third period.
Yeah, and when you start saying the names that were on that team, you know, from Messier to Gretzky to Glenn Anderson, you can go on and on, Kevin Lowe, Grant Fuhrer in net, and you can continue on.
Paul Coffey, Yari Curry.
The list goes on, and that they couldn't score in that last 14 minutes and 46 seconds is remarkable.
Some say that there was some karma also for Smith here, because he speared, allegedly, Kerry Wilson in Game 6 of that series, ruptured Wilson's spleen, so he couldn't play going forward after that. And then, of course, this unfortunate incident to decide the series in Game 7. But one of the other memorable pieces about this was that when the Oilers won their third cup in 4 years, the following spring, winning Game 7 against the Flyers, after Wayne Gretzky was handed the cup, the first player he gave it to was Steve Smith.
Because I'm sure Steve Smith felt so bad for so long about costing them what could have ended up being their third straight cup the year before.
But as some had said, perhaps because they had to go through that adversity, that's why they were able to win the next 2 cups after that. We'll never know whether it could have been 5, but that's the way the story wrote itself.
Great history.
That'll do it for our show for today. Our website is NHLWraparound.com. Feel free to email us at any time at NHLWraparound@gmail.com or at Neil at NHL Wraparound or Vic at NHL Wraparound. And don't forget, please check out some of our other content, which is constantly now posting on X. With that, enjoy the hockey on Wednesday. We will speak to you again Thursday.